The mission was supposed to be routine. That is what Commander Vrex Tolin told his crew on the morning of departure, standing straight back at the center of the observation deck, his four eyes blinking in practice sequence, the kind of confident blink that says, "I have done this before and nothing terrible has happened to me." Yet, he said it with the calm of someone reading from a menu. Survey the new system. Catalog the third planet. Come home before the Dominion's quarterly report was due. Nobody on that ship had any idea what the third planet was going to do to them. It started normally enough. The Velhari survey vessel, designated the ISV Catharak, dropped out of its full corridor approximately 40 million kilometers from the yellow star at the center of a new system. Science Officer David Prillam, a seven-limbed specialist who had surveyed over 200 worlds, pressed her optical sensors against a deep-range scope and made a sound that no one on the crew had ever heard her make before. It was something between a wheeze and a laugh. A wheeze laugh, if you will, a wheeze laugh that immediately made everyone very uncomfortable. "Prillam," said Vrex, slowly. "What is it?" "It is a Class M world," she said, pulling back from the scope. "Nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, liquid water, photosynthetic flora, all very standard." She paused. "Except that it is broadcasting." The bridge went quiet. Not broadcasting like a probe. Mind you, not the faint, accidental electromagnetic leakage that planets sometimes make when their star activity spikes. This was structured, intentional, layered, signal upon signal upon signal, compressed and repeating, saturating nearly every frequency band available, like a civilization that had discovered radio and then simply never stopped talking about anything to anyone who would listen across 100 different channels simultaneously. "They know we are here?" asked Junior Navigator Kosyemba, gripping his console. "No," said Deva, with a strange expression. "They do not know anyone is listening at all. They are just talking to each other, all the time, constantly, about everything." Vrex stared at her. "About what kind of everything?" Deva blinked slowly. One signal appears to be a live feed of a small furry creature knocking objects off a flat surface. Another is what I can only describe as two beings arguing about a game involving a spherical object and a series of nets. There is one that appears to be music, although I use that term generously. And there is one, she said, pausing for effect, that is a continuous, uninterrupted broadcast of one individual telling other individuals what they ate for previous meal, accompanied by visual documentation. The bridge was silent for 4 full seconds. "They are primitive?" asked Koss, hopefully. "They have fusion reactors," said Deva, "and split the atom approximately 80 of their years ago." Koss made the face of someone who has just realized the universe is not a safe place. They decided to move closer. Carefully, every probe and sensor array was deployed at maximum range. Passive only, absolutely no active scanning, because the last thing anyone wanted was to accidentally announce themselves to a species that had already figured out how to split things that were not meant to be split. The Catharak coasted in on a long elliptical arc, tucked behind the fourth planet, a gas giant that smelled of sulfur and regret. What they found was extraordinary. The third planet was not just inhabited. It was, by every scientific measurement available, saturated with life. The beings who lived there, bipedal creatures with only 2 eyes and a frankly alarming lack of redundant biology, had spread themselves across nearly every available surface. They had cities on mountains, cities in deserts, cities on the edges of frozen continents where the temperature could strip exposed tissue in minutes. They had built roads through rainforests and pipelines beneath oceans, and structures so tall they visibly interrupted the local weather patterns. "They built a wall," said Deva, zooming in on a sensor image. "A wall, thousands of kilometers long, along the border of one of their territorial divisions." "For defense?" asked Vrex. "For both sides, apparently," said Deva. They could not agree which side was keeping whom out. Vrex filed that information somewhere behind his third eye, where he kept other things he did not fully understand. The real trouble, however, did not begin until sensor analyst Runo Fat, a quiet and meticulous individual who had barely spoken in 3 weeks of travel, called out from his station in a voice that cracked slightly at the edges. "Commander," said Runo, "I am reading approximately 8 billion of them. Vrex nodded. A large population, yes. No, said Runo. 8 billion. On one planet. One single planet. Breathing the same air. There was a very long pause. And they have not, Koss asked carefully, killed each other yet? They have tried, said Deva, without a hint of humor. Extensively. Repeatedly. At great cost and with considerable creativity. And yet, she gestured at the sensor feed, where the blue-white world rotated in perfect serenity. 8 billion. Vrex stood at the observation window and looked at the planet for a long time. It glowed softly against the dark. It looked peaceful from here. It always does from far enough away. We ever need a closer look, he said finally. Nobody volunteered for that part. Nobody volunteered. That is worth repeating, because the crew of the ISV Kothrak was not, by any definition, a crew of cowards. Vrex Tolin had personally led a surface expedition on a world whose atmosphere was primarily chlorine. Deva Prilam had once cataloged a fungal ecosystem that attempted to eat 3 of her 7 limbs. Koss Yemba had navigated a fold corridor through a binary star system on a bad calculation, and had come out the other side with only minor psychological damage. These were experienced professionals, and not one of them raised a limb to go down to the 3rd planet. In the end, they sent Runo Fat, not because he was least valuable, and not because Vrex disliked him, although Runo did have a habit of correcting people's arithmetic mid-sentence, which nobody appreciated. They sent Runo because Runo, after 40 minutes of silence, had quietly said, "I will go," in the tone of someone who had already done the math and concluded that dying of curiosity was still dying of something, which at least had a certain dignity to it. He took a Class 4 stealth pod. Passive sensors only. No communications until he was back above the upper atmosphere. Absolute non-interference protocol. He was to observe, record, and return. Under no circumstances was he to make contact. He made contact in approximately 6 hours. To be fair to Runo, it was not entirely his fault. The beings, who called themselves humans, turned out to have an absolutely unreasonable talent for noticing things that were not meant to be noticed. Runo had landed the pod in a dense forest area on the northern continent, chosen specifically because the sensor data showed minimal population density. He had then deployed a standard holographic camouflage field and settled in to observe a small cluster of structures approximately 2 kilometers to the east. Within 20 minutes, a small human had walked directly to the edge of his camouflage field, stopped, and stared at exactly the spot where the pod was. The small human was, by local developmental standards, very young, perhaps 8 or 9 of their orbital years. It was wearing a garment covered in images of other creatures and holding a long stick, which it was using to prod things on the ground for reasons Runo could not scientifically determine. It stared at the invisible pod. The pod stared back. Invisibly, the small human said something in its local language that the ship's translation matrix, running passively through Runo's earpiece, rendered approximately as, "I see you." Runo, who had spent his entire career measuring things from very far away and writing about them in reports that no one read, did something that no protocol covered and no training had prepared him for. He panicked. And when Runo panicked, his second and third fingers, which controlled the pod's external speaker array, made involuntary contact with the activation pad. The pod said in perfect local language, because the translation matrix was already running, "No, you do not." The small human blinked. "Yes, I do." "You are mistaken," said Runo, through the pod, in the voice of a scientist who was now completely committed to a bad decision. "There is nothing here. You should return to your dwelling unit." The small human sat down cross-legged in front of the invisible pod. "Are you an alien?" Runo considered his options. They were limited. "No," he said. "You sound like an alien." "I sound like a completely ordinary member of your species," said Runo, who sounded nothing of the sort, because the translation matrix rendered his voice with a faint harmonic overtone that was extremely difficult to explain away. The small human nodded slowly, the way humans apparently nod when they have already decided something, and are simply allowing the other party to catch up. "I am going to call you Steve," it said. Runo sent an emergency signal to the Kothrak. What followed over the next 72 hours was the most chaotic, most illuminating, and most deeply unsettling first contact situation in the recorded history of the Velhari Dominion. The child, whose actual name was Bex, short for something Runo could not phonetically reproduce, did not tell any adults about the invisible spaceship in the forest. Not because it was afraid, and not because it lacked the opportunity. It did not tell anyone because, as explained to Runo with absolute sincerity, adults do not believe in good things. Runo relayed this to Vrex over the secure channel. Vrex sat with it for a moment. That is, he said finally, the saddest and most accurate thing I've ever heard about a species. Through Bex, they learned things that no long-range sensor could have told them. They learned that humans were aware on some level, that they were not alone in the universe, and that this awareness produced in them not one single unified emotion, but approximately 47 simultaneous, conflicting ones, which they managed by making films about it, arguing about it on the signal networks, and then largely continuing with whatever they had been doing before. They learned that humans had a concept called a weekend, which was essentially a scheduled interruption of productivity for the purpose of recovering from productivity, which Deva found so philosophically sophisticated that she wrote 6 pages about it in her preliminary report. They learned that humans cried, not from physical damage only, but from music, from stories, from watching other creatures suffer, from watching other creatures be unexpectedly kind. Runo observed, through the pod external sensors, a large adult human crying at a moving image sequence about a small robot on a desolate planet who wanted to go home. He sent the footage to Deva. She watched it 3 times and did not say anything for an hour. They learned that humans had looked at the same night sky the Kothrak was currently hiding behind, and had not cowered, and had not despaired, and had not concluded that the emptiness meant they were small. They had named every star, every single one they could see. They had given them names from dozens of their own languages, claimed them like old friends, and then built stories about them that lasted for thousands of years. They had looked at the incomprehensible dark and said, essentially, yes, but have you considered that this part right here belongs to us? On the morning of the 4th day, Vrex called the crew together on the observation deck. The blue planet hung on the screen behind him, lit gold along one edge by its yellow star. Recommendations, he said simply. Deva spoke first. They are not ready for formal contact. Their own internal divisions are too significant. The introduction of confirmed external intelligence could either unify them or accelerate conflict, and we cannot predict which. So we leave, said Koss. We leave, Vrex confirmed. We file the report. We recommend a monitoring designation, and we do not come back until they have had more time. There was a pause. How much time? Asked Runo, who was still thinking about Bex and the stick, and the cross-legged certainty of someone who had not yet learned to disbelieve good things. Enough, said Vrex. He did not define it further, because some answers are not honest if they are too precise. They pulled the Kothrak back out beyond the gas giant, and prepared the fold corridor for departure. Runo sat at his station, and filed his sensor logs. In the final entry, which no regulation required, and no superior officer would likely read, he wrote the following. The beings of the 3rd planet are fragile in every measurable way. Their biology is unprotected. Their lifespan is short. Their world is loud and crowded and frequently unkind to them. They have been shaped by scarcity and conflict and a gravity, while they have only barely begun to escape. And yet they name stars. They cry for strangers. They send their art in the void on golden discs addressed to no one. They teach their young that something might be out there and that it might be worth meeting. A child sat in front of my invisible ship and decided I was worth knowing. She called me Steve. I did not know why that is the detail I cannot stop thinking about. But it is. The fold corridor opened. The ISV Kothrak stepped through it and was gone. The blue planet kept turning. It always does.